An Acceptable Time by Madeleine L'Engle, Chapter 8. Polly slept late, and when she got up, both her grandmother and Hadron were gone. She hurried downstairs. She had a stubborn determination to see this adventure through. All her senses were unusually alert. The smell of danger was in the air, and she had a strong feeling that, even if she wanted to, there was no way she could run away from whatever awaited her. Could Tav really sacrifice her without Corrales or Animal's consent? They would never give it. They were the leaders of the tribe, and surely they would be listened to. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Her grandparents came in from the pool. Her grandfather dressed and then came to the table with the morning paper. When her grandmother went out to the lab, bearing her cup of coffee, the dog came leaping in, jumped up and greeted Polly and her grandfather. Then went to Hadron and licked the cat, who flicked his tail indifferently. Polly idly watched the big dog and the half-grown cat. Hadron had jumped to his feet and was thoroughly and diligently washing Og's face, while the big dog sat patiently. "Granddad, look!" He smiled at the two creatures. "Our animals have always been friends, but this is remarkable. I have a feeling we aren't going to be able to get rid of Og, and oddly enough, I don't want to. I wish I could hold on to the thought that he's only an ordinary stray." He picked up a ballpoint pen and began doing his crossword puzzle. Dr. Louise arrived shortly after lunch. Clouds were scudding across the sky, and although it was warm in the sun, the wind was brisk. "Where's Naze?" Mrs. Murray asked. "I don't know where Naze is." Dr. Louise looked troubled. "He took off in hiking boots right after breakfast and said he'd meet me here." "I think we have enough Ogham stones." Mrs. Murray glanced at the two on the dresser, which she had still not removed. "I don't think he was looking for Ogham stones. He seemed unusually preoccupied. You know, Kate, it's really rather foolish, my coming here. I can't very well ask that young man to let me listen to his heart, and I'm not one for long-distance diagnosis. I need to know his history, talk to his doctor, but I, too, feel the need to protect Polly. I don't have office hours on Saturday, and I have only one patient in the hospital, and I promised Nason I'd meet him here." "I'm glad you've come," Mrs. Murray said, and Polly echoed her. "And I'm curious," Dr. Louise acknowledged. "I think all this is folly, but at the same time I'm curious." She laughed at herself and glanced at Polly, who was finishing the luncheon dishes. Mr. Murray was out, chopping more wood, a never-ending task, and they could hear the rhythmic stroke of his axe. The dog was with him and occasionally barked in sheer exuberance. "Nothing new, I hope, Polly?" "No, I just wish the bishop were here." "Why?" "I want to talk to him about blood." "What about blood?" "Well, I know that blood is important in all cultures, and in lots of Eastern religions, women have to be set apart, away from everybody else during their menstrual periods, because they're thought to be unclean." "Maybe not unclean as you're thinking of it," the doctor said. "Remember, sanitary napkins and tampons are inventions of this century." Polly looked at her questioningly. "My grandmothers and women before them used old sheets, any old linens. Back in the Stone Age, there weren't any cloths to use. Having women set apart during their periods was a simple sanitary measure and a ritual that was often looked forward to when women could be together and rest from the regular back-breaking work. It was a time of rejuvenation and peace and prayer." "I hadn't thought about that," Polly said. "I guess I took a lot for granted. But weren't men convinced that women were, I think I read somewhere, separated from God at that time?" Dr. Louise smiled. "You will have to ask Naze about that. All I can tell you is that superstition has been around as long as human beings." Polly had a dish towel over one arm. "Okay, yes, but what about blood sacrifice?" "I suppose I think it's superstition," Dr. Louise said. "The earth doesn't need human blood in order to be fertile. But what about—" "What, Polly?" her grandmother urged. "Well, Jesus. Aren't we supposed to believe that he had to shed his blood to save us?" Dr. Louise shook her head decisively. "No, Polly, he didn't have to." "Then, suppose one of your siblings was in an accident and lost a great deal of blood and needed a transfusion, and suppose your blood was the right type. Wouldn't you want to offer it?" "Well, sure, but you'd do it for love, not because you had to, wouldn't you?" "Well, yes, of course, but I'm a doctor, Polly, not a theologian, and lots of Christian dogma seems to me no more than barnacles encrusting a great rock. I don't think that God demanded that Jesus shed blood unwillingly. With anguish, yes, but with love. Whatever we give, we have to give out of love. That, I believe, is the nature of God. Okay, Polly said. Okay, that's good. I don't quite understand it, but it makes some kind of sense. She looked at Dr. Louise and thought she must be a good doctor, someone you could truly trust with your life. Polly, her grandmother said, why these specific questions? Oh, well, Tav doesn't seem to believe in some kind of does seem to believe in some kind of blood sacrifice. Tav lived 3,000 years ago, her grandmother reminded her. He didn't know what was going to happen 1,000 years later. There was the sound of a car outside on the lane, and the toot of a horn. Ogham barked, telling them about it, tail swishing back and forth, ready to greet the guest. Mrs. Murray patted her head. Thanks, Og, and turned toward the door. Must be Zachary. Bring him in, Dr. Louise suggested, and we'll give him a cup of tea. Once again, Zachary had parked his car on the lane. He kissed Polly in greeting, then said, Thanks for letting me come. It means a lot to me. It's good to see you. Come on in and say hello. Who's here? My grandparents. Though Granddad's working outdoors, and Grand's friend, Dr. Louise. You met her. Yes. Nice. A bit formidable, maybe, but nice. What kind of a doctor is she? They went in through the garage. An internist, but she says she's basically a country doctor, and they're almost a lost breed. Endangered at any rate. They passed Mrs. Murray's lab and climbed the 3 steps to the kitchen, just as the kettle began to sing. Mrs. Murray went to the wood stove. Hello, Zachary. Will you join us for a cup of tea? Thanks. Tea would be fine. Hello, Dr. Kalubra. Nice to see you again. Zachary shook hands courteously, then sat at the table. Mrs. Murray poured tea. Sugar? Lemon? Milk? Just as it comes, please. She handed him a cup. It's another superb autumn day. Do you and Polly have plans? Zachary was wearing jeans and a bulky Irish knit sweater and new-looking running shoes. I thought we might go for a walk. Oh, good. If you drive to the ski area, there are several excellent walking trails. Polly says there are good places to walk right around here. There are, but now what? Polly thought. How are they going to keep us away from here? Mrs. Murray was busy adding more water to the teapot. I gather there's a good movie on in town if you're interested. It's only half an hour's drive. No thanks, Zachary said. I can go to a movie any time, and what I really want to do is just amble around and talk with Polly. Polly perched on the stool by the kitchen counter, where her grandmother sat to chop vegetables and waited. She knew she ought to say something, make some reasonable suggestion, but her mind was blank. How could she explain her trips to Anaral's time? Zachary had no idea that the girl he had seen was from the past, and if Polly cared anything about him, she would see to it that he didn't get drawn further in. Zachary, Mrs. Murray said, I'm simply going to have to ask you to take Polly somewhere else for your walk. As I said, there are some good hiking trails near the ski area. Zachary put down his cup. That was excellent tea, Mrs. Murray. Is something peculiar going on? Does it have something to do with that guy with the dog or the girl I saw the other day that Polly was so mysterious about? Anaral? In a way, yes. I don't mean to push, but could you explain? Dr. Louise stood up, took her cup to the sink, rinsed it, and put it on the rack. All right, Zachary, would you like an explanation? Yes, please. My brother, who is a retired bishop, has accidentally opened a time gate between the present and 3,000 years ago, when there were Druids living with the native people of this land. Her voice was calm without emphasis. The girl you saw on Thursday is a Druid and belongs to that time. Her people are largely peaceable, but one of the Celts who came here from Britain believes that the Earth Mother needs human blood to stop the drought which is driving other tribes to this part of the world, tribes which are not peaceable. Zachary stared at her and burst into laughter. You're kidding. Would that I were. But that's crazy, Dr. Kalubra smiled. Out of sight, Dr. Louise continued again in a cool academic way. It seems that there is at least one person back in that long ago time who feels that Polly would be just the right human sacrifice. Naturally, we are not eager for Polly to be drawn through the time gate into danger. There was what seemed to Polly a very long silence, and Zachary said, This is absolutely the most off-the-wall, Mrs. Murray said. You did see Anaral. I saw a beautiful girl. Describe her. She had a long black braid and honey-colored skin and eyes that weren't quite slanty, just a little exotic. Dr. Louise suggested. Definitely, I'd like to see her again. Even if it means going back 3,000 years. That's an extraordinary suggestion, Zachary said, especially coming from a physician who totally rejects everything she said and yet on another level has to admit the possibility. Why? It's impossible. A lot of things my forebears would have considered impossible, such as television or astronauts or much of modern medicine, are now taken for granted. Still, Polly has been through the time gate, so has my brother. My brother may be eccentric, but he's no fool. Mrs. Murray's voice, too, was quiet. We don't want Polly in any kind of danger, real or imaginary. Perhaps the imaginary danger is the most frightening because it is the least understood. Zachary looked at Polly, raising his brows at the story he was expected to take seriously. Polly said, Well, I know it sounds crazy, but there it is. In which case, Zachary touched her arm lightly, I'd still like to go for that walk with you. I gather this time gate is somewhere on your land? Yes, by the star-watching rock where we were the other day, but also by the swimming pool. That's where you saw Aniral. A swimming pool hardly seems the likeliest place for a time gate or whatever you call it. He sounded slightly dazed. The pool is over an underground river, and 3,000 years ago there wasn't a pool, and there wasn't a house. It was a great circle of standing stones. If I didn't know you're an intelligent person, I mean highly intelligent, do you believe all this? I've been there. Then. So I can't just wipe it out, can I? Suddenly he laughed. I'm intrigued. Really intrigued. You think the girl I saw actually lived 3,000 years ago? Yes, Polly said. Mrs. Murray? Dr. Kalubra? It appears to be a possibility, Mrs. Murray said. Who knows, then? He sounded suddenly wistful. He looked at Mrs. Murray and Dr. Louise. Polly may have told you I'm having some problems with my health. She told us that your heart is troubling you, Mrs. Murray said. And my life expectancy isn't good. If I'm to take all you've been saying seriously, maybe it would be a good idea for me to drop back 3,000 years. Not with Polly, Mrs. Murray was firm. Zach, Polly was tentative. Would you let Dr. Louise examine you, listen to your heart? Sure, Zachary said, but I don't think you... He turned courteously to Dr. Louise. Can find much beyond a murmur and some irregularity? Probably not, Dr. Louise agreed. I have my stethoscope with me, but that's all. Shall we go into the other room? Zachary followed her out, and Polly turned to her grandmother. He's right, I guess. I mean, she can't find out much just this way, can she? I doubt it, but Louise has a sixth sense when it comes to diagnosis. Polly, can't you suggest to Zachary that you go to the club or hike by the ski trails? I can suggest, Polly agreed, but I don't think Zach's up to much in the way of hiking. When Dr. Louise and Zachary came back, the doctor's face was noncommittal. Zachary obviously has excellent doctors, she said, who are doing everything I'd recommend. Now, my dears, I need to make a move on. What are your plans? We could amble along the lane toward the village, Polly suggested. Ambling is fine with me, Zachary said. Then to Dr. Louise, thank you very much, Doctor. You're very kind. And to Mrs. Murray, would it be possible for us to have tea and some of that marvelous cinnamon toast when we get back? Quite possible. Polly, just walk on the lane and the road to the village, please. Yes, Grand. She and Zachary went out through the pantry, and Polly took the red anorak off the hook. Are you warm enough? She asked. Sure. This sweater is warm enough for the Arctic, Polly. I wish your doctor friend had been able to give me some good news. She didn't say anything. Well, as you said, she didn't have anything except her stethoscope. Polly, do you believe in angels? He turned to follow her as she started down the dirt lane. I don't know. Probably. But not, she thought, that they're fairies with magic wands who could hold back bullets or make new a maimed heart. I wish my grandmother were still alive, the one who was willing to let me be and didn't load all kinds of expectations on me. I've gone along with the expectations. I could follow in Pop's footsteps if I had a life expectancy in which to do it. Now I'm not sure that's what I want. Maybe there's more to life. He turned as there was a sound behind them, and Og dashed to Polly, waving his tail, jumping up in joy. Down, Og, she said severely, and the dog obediently dropped to all fours. Hey, Zachary stared at Og. Where'd that dog come from? I mean, haven't I seen him before? Yes, Polly looked directly at him. Remember that man you saw under the oak tree the day you came looking for me? Yeah, he had a dog. This dog. Polly tried to keep her voice as dry and emotionless as Dr. Louise's. So how come he's here? Obviously thinking he belongs to you. Well, he just sort of appeared. What do you mean? Well, what I said. That's how my grandparents always get their dogs. Crazy, Zachary shrugged. Maybe, Polly said. The thing is, he's come through the time gate too. Zachary sighed exaggeratedly, then looked again at Og, who stood by Polly, long tail moving gently back and forth. Dogs going through time gates, that's as nuts as anything else. Yes, Polly agreed. He's sort of odd-looking, reminds me some of the dogs on the Egyptian friezes. Well, if he's 3,000 years old, that would explain it all, wouldn't it? He laughed, a short, unamused sound. Does he have a name? We're calling him Og. It's short for Ogum. It suits him, somehow. Zachary plucked a blade of grass and chewed on it. Polly, this dog, it's just another sign. I want to go back to that place, the star-watching rock, and that oak tree, and the stone wall where I met you. I can't go there, Zach, I promised. Og nudged his head under her hand, and she scratched between his ears. I just have a strong feeling that if we go there will be things I need to find out. I don't think so, Zach. There are things to find out just walking along here. This is a beautiful place. She paused to watch a small stream, not more than a trickle, sliding under some water willows. Suddenly fierce, he said, I don't give a bloody zug if it's beautiful. What I want to know is if there's some way I can live a little longer. I don't think that's likely here in this time. I don't like the way your doctor friend very carefully didn't say anything, but I saw her face. I saw the look in her eyes. You're projecting, Polly said firmly. She didn't say anything because she didn't have enough to go on. Just past the small stream, there was a faint path to their left, probably made by wildlife. Let's go this way, Zachary said. It doesn't go anywhere. It'll just end up in underbrush. Polly didn't remember having seen the small path before, but it ran roughly parallel to the orchard and the field that led to the stone wall. Polly, now Zachary's voice was soft. She followed him along the path in order to hear Og at her heels. I want to see what all this Ogum stuff is about. If somehow I could go back 3,000 years, what would happen? Would I be the same me, or would my heart be okay? I don't know. Polly watched Zachary push through browning blackberry brambles. Then the path widened out slightly and wound between grassy hummocks and across ubiquitous glacial rocks. Am I right? Zachary asked. Is this path going toward the star-watching rock? I've never been on it before. I don't think it goes anywhere. He reached back and caught her hand. Polly, please, I need you to help me. This isn't going to help. Come on, let's go home. She tried to release her hand. Polly, please don't pull against me. I need you to help me, please. Og had run on ahead of them and circled back, tail swishing happily. See, the dog thinks everything's okay, Zachary said. Now the path went under some wild apple trees, and they had to bend low. Then it opened up and joined the path to the stone wall. Louise the larger was lying there in the sunlight, but they were on the far side of the stone wall, and Zachary hurried away from her, along the path to the star-watching rock. No, Zach, come back! Louise raised her head several inches of body and began weaving back and forth. No, Zach, Polly repeated. Zach, come back! But he was continuing along the path, calling, Polly, please, don't desert me now. Og pushed against her, growling slightly, but she could not let Zachary go alone. Stumbling a little, she ran after him. Zachary, this is foolish. Nothing's going to happen. Okay, so if nothing happens, we'll just go back for tea. He stopped, breathing rapidly and with effort. His face was very pale, bluish around the lips. He reached out his hand to her for hers, and she took it. Under their feet, the ground seemed to tremble. There was a faint rumble as of distant thunder, then the air about them quivered with concealed lightning. Hey! Polly! Zachary's voice was soaked with surprise. The trunks of the trees thickened. The branches reached upward. Ahead of them, sunlight glinted off the water. Well, she said flatly, it's happened. What's happened? We've gone through the time gate. Look at the trees. They're much older and bigger. and that's a lake that fills the whole valley. And look at the mountains. They're younger and wilder, and there's still lots of snow on their peaks. I guess in geological terms, the Ice Age wasn't so long ago. Zachary stared around at the primeval forest, the jagged mountains. Maybe I've had a heart attack and died? No, Zach. In which case, he continued, you'd have to be dead too. No, Zachary, we aren't dead. We're 3,000 years ago. So in our time, we'd be dead, wouldn't we? We're alive right now. I don't feel any different. He breathed in, deeply disappointed. Hey, and the dog's still with us. Polly put her hand on his arm and saw Animal running toward them. Polly! Go back! It is not safe! She looked suddenly at Zachary, her hand to her mouth. Who? Zachary Gray. He saw you the other day. I guess you saw him too. Zachary stared at Animal. Who are you? Animal's eyes were veiled. Polly answered. She's a druid. Holy Zug! Go back, both of you. It's not safe. What's not safe? Zachary demanded. Last night there was a raid. Several of our best sheep and cows were taken. What's that got to do? Zachary started. Animal continued. Tav is wild, and not only Tav. We are all in danger. Raiders may return at any moment. Tav? Polly asked. Tav is not the only one who is ready to fight for our land. Corrales fears that there will be much bloodshed. You understand? No, Zachary said. Polly still could not conceive of having fun with someone you were planning to sacrifice. Annabelle looked at her. You understood what was being said. She paused, looking for words, continued. Around the council table. Most of it, I think. What did you understand, please? I think Tav believes that the Mother Earth, yes, that she demands a blood sacrifice and that I have been sent. Her skin prickled. Do you and Corrales? No, not us. For us. The Mother is loving and kind. Corrales, too, believes that you have been sent. Sent? Not for the shedding of blood. Corrales lies on the great altar rock and prays. Long, and says the pattern is not yet clear. Hey, what are you talking about? Zachary demanded. Well, Polly's face was stark. Tav believes, perhaps, that the earth demands blood in order to be fertile, and that my blood, her voice trailed off, Annabelle said. Corrales says that there is problem across the great water where he and Tav come from. He says it used to be that the shedding of the blood of a lamb was... She stopped. Enough? Polly suggested. Sufficient? Yes. And the lamb was thanked and mourned for, and then there was a great feast, and there came a time of no rain. You remember Tav told, yes, the lamb's blood was not sufficient. Sufficient rain did not fall. Crops died, people were hungry, and after Tav killed the man and his blood was spilled on the ground, rain came. Zachary asked, do you think that was why the rain came? No. We people of the wind do not try to tell the presence what to do, but to understand and use what is given, whether it seems good or bad. Some of my people think that there may be other gods across the water, gods who are angry and have to be placated, Zachary suggested. Annabelle looked at him questioningly. Polly said, the gods will be mad at you unless you give them what they want. Yes, Zachary scowled. But you think your God loves you? Annabelle smiled. Oh, yes. We do not always understand our part in the working out of the pattern. And you see, it is possible for people to work against the pattern, to tangle the lines of love between stars and people and places. The pattern is as perfect as a spider web and as delicate. And you... Her level gaze rested on Zachary. We do not know where you fit in the pattern, which lines come to you, or which lines are from you, or where the lines that touch you touch us. Og, who had been standing quietly by Polly, moved to Annabelle, and she reached down and patted the dog's head. Corrales has sent him to you. I am glad. Now go, please go to your own place in the spiral. She turned from them and ran swiftly away. Wow, Zachary said. Let's go after her. He took a few hurried steps. No, Zach, let's go home. Why? Polly was impatient. You heard Annabelle. Yes, and I'm fascinated. I want to know more. Zachary, it isn't safe. Surely you don't believe anybody is going to sacrifice you. I don't know what to believe. I know we should go home. She walked in the direction of the house, or what should be the direction of the house, but the trees continued to tower above them. From behind one of the great oaks came a low whistle, and she froze. Og pressed against Polly's legs, ears up and alert, tail down and motionless. "Polly!" It was Tav's voice. He appeared from behind the tree, and Og's tail began to wave. "You've come." "Who's that?" Zachary was startled. "I can't understand a word he's saying." "It's Tav," Polly said, "and he's speaking Ogham." "I know that," Zachary sounded irritated. "It's much faster than when my boss tries it." Polly turned back to Tav, and despite Annabel's warning, she was absurdly glad to see him. "He's a Celt, a warrior from ancient Britain." Og was pressed close against Polly, but he was not growling. His long rope of a tail was swishing back and forth. Tav, holding his great spear, firmly pointed at Zachary. "Who?" "His name is Zachary," Polly spoke slowly in Ogham, sounding out Zachary carefully. "He is from my own time." Tav raised his eyebrows. Zachary. "But we do not need another one." Tav's eyes were wide with surprise. "Why would the goddess send another one? I do not understand." The sun turned his pale hair to silver. Zachary interrupted. "What's he saying?" Behind them came the throb of drums. Low, menacing, Og's tail dropped and he began to growl, his hair bristling. Tav listened. "There is danger. Go back. Do you know that we have had a raid and some of our best animals taken?" Yes, Polly said. "I'm sorry." "Go home," Tav said quickly. "I'm not going back," Zachary muttered. Tav ignored him. "Oh, my Polly, there will be another raid. You must go. I do not understand why this one—" He looked at Zachary. "This Zach one has been sent." The sound of the drums grew louder, closer. Og barked. Polly turned to Tav. "I don't know how to get him to go back." Tav shook his spear. "Go then, Polly. Go." But suddenly the beating of drums was upon them, was joined by shouting. Screaming, closer, louder, and up the path from the direction of the lake, burst a group of men wearing skins with feathers in their dark hair. 2 of them were dragging Anarel with them, and 2 of them held Bishop Kalubra. Anarel was screaming, and the bishop was shouting, trying to free himself. Into their midst leapt Tav with his great war spear, one man against a mob. Polly grabbed a branch from the ground and rushed after him. Og crouched low and then launched himself at one of the men who held Anarel. He let her go, clutching at his throat, but she was still held in the other warrior's arms. Polly hit at him with the branch, which was dry and broke off ineffectually. She began kicking, hitting, clawing, biting, whatever she could do to free Anarel. She must have seemed such an extraordinary apparition in her red anorak and with her flaming hair that she almost wrenched Anarel away from the warrior before he thrust her roughly to the ground. "No!" Anarel screamed. "Go home, Polly!" The men were shouting, singing a high-pitched melody, each line ending with a shrill, "Oh!" Suddenly the bishop began to sing too, his voice quavering but clear. "Kyrie eleison, Christi eleison, Kyrie eleison." There was a beat of silent surprise. Then the clamor began again as the people of the wind came running from all directions, carrying spears, clubs, bows, arrows, shouting as they rushed the raiders. The noise and confusion made Polly reel, but she continued her wild fighting. Then, seemingly out of the blue, came Corrales, bearing a staff, trying to thrust it between the 2 groups. "Stop!" he was shouting. "Stop this madness!" "You can't stop it," Tav shouted back. "They have Anarel and the Heron." Polly was grabbed from behind and heaved up into the arms of one of the raiders. She grabbed at his hair, knocking his feathers askew. Og leaped to her defense and was felled by the blow of a heavy club. "Help!" Polly shrieked. "Help!" Then a hand slapped roughly against her mouth and she bit at it. "Help!" Now Corrales was thrusting with his great staff fiercely, and his young warriors were shouting too, and there was nothing but chaos and terror. Polly wrenched her head free of the man's hand. "Help!" she screamed again. Then there was a strange hush. still as the eye of a hurricane, a harsh cry of terror. The raiders, holding Anarol and the bishop, let go abruptly, and to Polly's amazement they turned and ran away. She herself was dumped on the ground. She picked herself up and saw Louise the Larger slithering along the path, red tongue flickering. As suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The raiders were running away, bumping into each other in their fear. And we will pause there.